G'day guys, welcome back to another tipping video on the channel. Today I'll be going through my round 21 predictions and also going through what occurred in round 20. So yeah, let's get straight into it, starting off with a horrible loss on last Friday night for Collingwood. Pretty bad one, pretty tricky loss in the end. Obviously Carlton won that game, and then a weird Saturday. This was the complete round of upsets where every single game on the Saturday was an upset. I tipped Geelong obviously, and Fremantle got the job done. I tipped GWS, so I was pretty happy with that one, and I'll definitely take that. I ended up tipping Brisbane, and they ended up getting smashed in the Q clash. That was very interesting. Sydney, in a bit of a 50-50 game, won that one, and I tipped Essendon, unfortunately. And yeah, I obviously tipped Port in the showdown, and Adelaide pumped them. So a horrible Saturday for me, and on the Sunday I was actually doing pretty decently to start it off with St Kilda and Hawthorn, so I'll definitely take that, tipping the Saints. Richmond versus Melbourne played a really good game, and was the only game that wasn't an upset in the end for the round. The Dees, I obviously tipped there, and then the final game was West Coast versus North Melbourne, and we all know what happened there. North Melbourne failed me, and West Coast got the job done. So yeah, not the best round obviously for tips. I got 3 out of 9, but I did decently with my big calls. I didn't start too well on the Friday night. I predicted Jamie Elliott to kick 3 or more goals, and he didn't kick any. I predicted Fremantle to go goalless in any quarter. That did not happen. In Bulldogs vs Giants, I predicted both teams to score a combined of 160 points or less, and that was actually correct. Always going to favour that down at Mars. Then in the Q clash, I predicted the Suns to kick 4 first quarter goals, and I believe they kicked 4 goals in almost every quarter except the first one, I believe. So yeah, a bit unfortunate there. And funny enough, in Essendon versus Sydney, I predicted Buddy to kick 4 more goals, and he got injured, and now he's retired, the Bud, and he will never play again. So I think I'll always remember that. And Adelaide versus Port Adelaide, I predicted Adelaide to lead for 75% of the match, and that actually happened. I think they were up for the whole game, so I'll definitely take that one. And then on the Sunday, let's be real, they were all incorrect. I predicted Hawthorn to get 60 points or less. I predicted the lead to never go beyond 24 points in the Melbourne versus Richmond game, and that obviously didn't happen, seeming the final result. And I predicted West Coast and North to both kick 80 points, and they both scored. Well, they were lucky to get 70 in the end, the Eagles. So I got 2 out of 9 for my big calls. It was a shocking round for most people. Hopefully I can do a lot better this round. Round 21 looks like it's going to be a lot easier. So yeah, let's jump straight into it. Starting off with the Friday night game. Should be an intriguing clash. It's Western Bulldogs taking on Richmond. Now, Richmond have a very unfavourable draw here because they've only just recently played, and 5 days later they'll have to be playing in a huge game where if they win, they keep their season alive. I think if they lose, they're out of it, Richmond. The Bulldogs, I think, have to win 3 out of 4 games to make the 8, or at least get the required wins that will make the 8. There is still a chance that they could still make the 8. They're currently sitting in 8, the Dogs. Now, both teams obviously weren't great, coming off losses. The Dogs' defence is getting worse and worse by the week. They lost Alex Keefe to concussion, and Josh Bruce has undergone his second ACL within, I think, 2 and a bit years. So that's just unfortunate for him, and their defensive stocks are getting pretty low. Good thing Richmond don't have a tall forward line, though. Now, the Dogs' midfield was absolutely sensational in the first 2.5 quarters. They were up by 36 points at one stage in that third quarter and somehow choked it. And Bevo was left pretty, well, speechless after the game, really, after that performance. They've got to respond from that, the Dogs. Richmond were really impressive, but fell short in the final quarter. Their defence was obviously going to end up being the worst in a shootout, so I feel like most people would have predicted that to happen. I reckon it'll be close, but it is at Marvel, so I've got to go the Dogs, and I'm going to tip them by 9 points. My big call, the Dogs kicked the first 3 goals of the match. I reckon they'll get a quick start, seeming Richmond's 5-day break. They could, not be switched on to start the game. And then starting on the Sunday, it's going to be a pretty interesting game, and not for a good reason. If you're an Eagles fan, they're taking on the Bombers at Marvel. This could get ugly. Let's just say that they obviously won last week, West Coast, their first win since round 2 against the Giants. Both wins coming at home this year as well. They did, pretty decently in the first half, or at least the first quarter and first half of the second quarter. They did let North back into the game in the fourth quarter and halfway through the second. North Melbourne were horrible in the third quarter, and that's pretty much why West Coast won that game. It was a pretty dead rubber game. Obviously, the Harley Reid Cup and West Coast ended up getting the job done, and they could still somehow avoid coming bottom. And Essendon were, pretty good in a shootout, to be fair. But obviously, again, out of Essendon and Sydney, the Essendon's defence that they had on the park that day probably wasn't as good as Sydney's, and that's probably why Sydney won the game. It was also Sydney were up by a good 40 points. Essendon did a fantastic job of coming back. Kyle Langford was inspirational with the 5 goals. Their midfield was a lot better than it has been recently, Essendon. And they should obviously win this one. I'll go by 71 points, and my big call, Langford, backs it up with another 5 or more goal performance, hopefully. And then we got the Adelaide Crows taking on the Suns. This one is at Adelaide Oval. They met at the start of the, I think it was midway through the year. It wasn't too long ago now, actually, where the Suns got it done up in Darwin. But this one is over at Adelaide Oval, so you would expect the Crows to win this one. They were really, really impressive on the weekend. Both teams, actually. The Crows were really, really impressive in the showdown. Tex Walker kicked 7 goals. Their midfield dominated Ports, and their defence actually held up quite well with quite a few youngsters down there. And Josh Worrell was impressive. Mark Keane on debut was really good. Unfortunately, they did lose Butts, and he is out for the season. So now they have, I believe, just one recognised defender in Worrell. They have Keane as well, but let's be real, Keane is not a very good player. And yeah, look, their midfield was really, really impressive last week. Matt Crouch was really, really good. Dawson, Laird. They should start as strong favourites against the Suns, who will have belief, They have to win every single game, obviously, to make the finals, and that's going to be pretty much impossible. But they'll have belief after absolutely obliterating the Lions. They absolutely tagged Lockie Neal out of the game. Took Miller, tagged him to the core in that one, and their midfield just dominated. Noah Anderson was huge, kicked some crucial goals. Matt Rao as well. Jared Ritz was huge in the ruck. Their defence was pretty good. Mac Andrews been playing some good footy back there. Sam Collins was really, really impressive on Joe Danaher. And their forward line, managed to do really, really well. Ben King kicked 5 or something. So they were really, really impressive on the weekend, the Suns, and I definitely like them a lot better under Stephen King. He could actually become their proper coach next year. I do see them challenging the Crows. I reckon the Crows, though, will be too strong and win by 26 points. And my big call is actually going to be the Crows are up by 50 or more points at any time in the match. I reckon the Crows will be pretty good for a majority of the game. And then we got the Pies taking on the Hawks at the G, also on the Saturday afternoon time slot. Now, obviously, both teams weren't so good on the weekend. Hawthorn had a horrible first quarter and a horrible finish to the game, which cost them the game. James Sicily was tagged out of it by Cooper Sharp, and it definitely affected the Hawks' defence. Their defence was absolutely lousy, and Sam Mitchell as well. The midfield group in the first quarter was horrible, and he gave them an absolute spray at quarter time. Their forward line actually did pretty well. Bruce was impressive. Wingard had another good game, so at least they're doing well in some areas of the ground. Hawthorn and Collingwood obviously weren't great, but we're hoping it's just a one-off. Jeremy Howe went forward and was impressive. We just struggled to get the ball in our half, and when we did, we just missed every single shot. I think Elliott kicked a few behinds. Myercheck was inaccurate. Same with Dan McStay. Bo McCreary was inaccurate. We should regain Bobby Hill back for this one, though. It does look like Mason Cox is going to lose his spot, so there's a bit of controversy with him at the moment. obviously the Pies should get it done, and I reckon we can get a comfortable win, and basically shush up the critics that we're a bad three-quarter time team, always down at three-quarter time. 17 of our past 32 games we've been down at three-quarter time. We should be up at three-quarter time though in this one. I reckon we'll win by 39 points. And my big call, it's not a good one. I think it will happen though. Hopefully it doesn't though. Mitch Lewis kicked 6 or more goals. Darcy Moore conceded 6 to Curnow last week, so, it could happen again. And then arguably it's going to be game of the round down at GMHBA. It's Geelong taking on Port Adelaide in a huge contest. Now, I believe Geelong have to win almost every single game to make the top 8. And they've got Collingwood next week, so this is a must-win for them down at GMHBA. Now, they were obviously really, really disappointing on the weekend. And the fact that they lost Hawkins and Blitzarves does not improve their odds at all. They just played slow, boring footy, Geelong. Their midfield was disappointing. Didn't help that Blitzarves went out. He could be their most valuable player. And, Fremantle just brought their tackling pressure and just speed on the ball, and Geelong just looked lacklustre. And, Chris Scott came out a few weeks ago saying that we're the danger. Well, I think he's got to rephrase that now after that performance because it was horrible. Now, you just got to hope that it hasn't taken too much out of the players because their defence as well was really, really poor. Collar Jasny was making poor errors. Tom Stewart had a few errors late in the game with kick-ins. That probably cost them the game in the end. Port Adelaide were obviously really, really disappointing. And the story of the night was Aaliyah and Jones turning out to be concussed after the game. Turns out that Aaliyah played concussed on Tex Walker. So you probably wonder how Tex Walker kicked those 7 goals. He probably kicked most of them when Aaliyah was concussed. And Jones as well was subbed out with migraine. So if they weren't, come out saying that they were ruled out with concussion, I think they would have said Jones was all right. He just had a migraine. Very, very odd. Their midfield was really, really poor. Port. Ollie Wines, there's questions about him at the moment. Travis Boak played as sub, So, there's questions with some of their key players, Port Adelaide, at the moment. They're in some really, really, really poor form. And they are vulnerable here. I do see the Cats bringing out an amazing performance. And you know what? I think I might actually tip them in a bit of an upset by 8 points. But my big call, powell-pepper, kicks 3 or more goals. He was really, really, really quiet last week. Probably why Port got smashed in the end. They don't get smashed too often, Port. And, I think he'll have a massive response for them. And we got the Battle of the Bridge. Bit of a derby on the Saturday night. Arguably the better matchup for most people. I still believe Geelong v Port will be better though. And it'll be GWS versus Sydney. Now, both teams have gotten good wins last week and been in some decent form. The Swans, maybe they're starting to find some form. Their forward line was really, really well. Wicks, I think, kicked 3. Logan McDonald was impressive. Marty kicked 4. I think all in the first half. He was fantastic. Heaney and Papley were good. Obviously, Buddy got subbed out and we won't see him again, which is pretty unfortunate. But their forward line was firing. Obviously, their defence wasn't too good and is still definitely their biggest question at the moment, the Swans. But their midfield was good enough to beat the Bombers' midfield, which definitely does say something. And their forwards were impressive. And they can still make the finals. But I think they have to win every single game. And I don't see them winning this one. Because it is at Giants Stadium, you feel you've got to go with the Giants. They were really, really good in that comeback against the Dogs. They played, pretty poorly for about 2.5 quarters. But then it was just led by Toby Greene and Sam Taylor, Kieran Briggs. Just a few of their key players just absolutely lifted and they were absolutely inspirational. I'm going to go the Giants in this one by 17 points. Do think it'll be close. And my big call, Toby Greene and Callum Brown, who's been really, really impressive up forward. I reckon they're going to combine for 6 or more goals in this game. Now, the Sunday games, they don't look too good on paper. I do think 2 of them will be pretty decent, and we'll obviously start with the poor one, North Melbourne and Melbourne down at Tassie. North were horrible last week. Paul Curtis was a shining light in their performance, though, with 4 goals. But yeah, their midfield got it was actually doing really well in the first half, but got comprehensively beaten in the second half, and probably why they lost the game in the end. And, you know, Melbourne, most people were going to say that they're going to be lucky if they were going to win that game, but they just surged in that last quarter, led by Harrison Petty with the 6 goals. Van Ryan kicked 4. Melksham looked impressive. Neil Bullen looked pretty good. Petrarca didn't have the same impact as he normally has up forward, but then again, he still provided some good stuff. And Max Gawn, again, was probably one of their big pillars on why they won that game. Obviously, the Grundy-Gawn, Gaundy is now over, you'd think. And, yeah, maybe they finally found their right forward half mix, the Dees. The only thing that didn't go right for them in that one was Cosy Pickett was incredibly quiet. Does he get dropped? You could argue that he might get dropped, but maybe not. Obviously going to go with the Dees in this one by 30 points, get a comfortable win. But my big call, North lead for 15 or more minutes in the first half. I do think they'll be pretty competitive in this one, North, especially in the first half. Now, we've got St Kilda versus Carlton on the Channel 7 Sunday afternoon time slot. It should be an interesting one. They also met on a Sunday afternoon earlier this year, and it was St Kilda getting the job done. Now, I don't think it'll be this way the same time, but you never know. They were impressive last week, the Saints. They were good in the first quarter. Yeah, they almost choked, but they were solid enough in the fourth quarter to come out with the better side, the 4 points, and somehow they're fifth. They're going to be the worst fifth side you ever see. Like, it's unbelievable. But, you know, their forward line was good. Their midfield was huge. You know, Crouch and Steele. Crouch kicked 3 goals and had like 33 possessions. So, he had an inspirational game. And Carlton, obviously, got the job done against the Pies. Curnow was massive. Their midfield, when it mattered, was pretty good. And their defence, obviously, was absolutely sensational. They should win this one, Carlton. I'll go by 15 points, and my big call, there are 5 or more lead changes in an entertaining Sunday afternoon game. And then also on the Sunday afternoon, we got Fremantle versus Brisbane at Optus Stadium, which does make it a little bit more interesting. Brisbane don't go over there too often. It's their first game there this season, and I think it's their first there since last time they played against Freo, which was halfway through last season, so they haven't played over there in over a year, Brisbane. And for some reason, I see this one being one of the closest games of the round. I don't know why. Brisbane were horrible last week. Lachie Neale got tagged out of the game. Their midfield just lacked. I guess they didn't have Ashcroft, but they don't have him for the rest of the year and most of next year, so they've just got to adapt without him. They were playing good footy last year without him. Josh Dunkley was a bit quiet as well, so, you know, their midfield got comprehensively beaten. They just couldn't get it in their forward line enough. And when they did, it was Collins or McAndrew intercepting. So, yeah, they've definitely got to improve. Harris Andrews had a shocker as well. I think they've got a few injuries. McInerney could be out. So, yeah, they've got to win this game, Brisbane. And if they do, they will actually take second spot from Port. And Freo were, you know, they were really impressive actually against Geelong last week. They didn't start the game too well, obviously, but they did all right later on in their second quarter. You know, with the fast, dynamic, pressured players really getting into it, like Switkowski, Schultz, Frederick. Yeah, they were really, really impressive. They all did it without Sean Darcy as well, which was even more impressive. Obviously, Geelong did have their injuries, and they just looked off Geelong. And it was a good win in an upset round for Freo. Now, I do see Freo almost upsetting here, but I will go Brisbane by 18 points. But my big call, Fremantle lead for 50% or more of the match. I'm not brave enough to go with anything more than that because Freo could get smashed. And if Brisbane want to prove that they're a good side, they will smash Freo. But I have absolutely no clue. So yeah, 50% of the match for that one. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the tipping video. Hopefully we can all do better after a horrible round of upsets. One of the weirdest rounds in footy you will ever see. Hope you guys enjoyed the predictions video and stay tuned for my Collingwood review coming out after the clash against the Hawks and at the G on Saturday.